So how can analytics be disruptive?
We talk about analytics being disruptive in terms of the way it's disrupting the current business of analytics, I guess is maybe one way to think about it. And it really boils down to the technologies are changing, the way we're thinking about it's changing, but also the kinds of things that are possible are changing. So historically, we've looked at things like demographics. We sample, we bucket, and we might figure out that you represent a demographic, and then people want to get to you. They'll send mailings or things like that that are representative across that demographic. It's sort of the equivalent of a mortgage-backed security. We're taking a lot of things and putting them into one chunk.
Sure.
The technologies that are available today let us scale deeply down into it, and we can look at individual consumers, where they're located right now, that kind of thing. So just as an example, it's the ability to really drive down, look at how all the customers of a bank or some other organization are similar to each other, and then be able to make offers or other things down to that very, very granular level, down to the individual person.
Sure.
So that's one example of how things are really changing there.
Now, I know some of your work has dealt with intentional emergence.
Yeah.
What is that and what's involved with it?
Yeah, what I mean by that is the notion that, particularly as we become a more networked society, a more networked workplace, more networked politically, et cetera, there's a shift towards emergent organization, emergent development. So things sort of, kind of, in some sense, aren't planned. They sort of emerge out of the ooze, right? And what I meant by that was that large organizations in particular have to figure out how to sort of impedance match what they do internally with what their customers or what the world around them expects.
I see.
So if you're a planned, hierarchical, reductionist kind of organization, but your customer base is being networked together, and there's emergent properties out there in terms of how they react to you or interact with you, sort of like some of the hashtag disasters we've seen recently with some companies. In order to sort of interact in that world, you need to be emergent as well, or at least elements of your strategy need to be emergent. And it's sort of maybe doesn't make sense in a way, but you need to intentionally figure out how to create the conditions by which you can do emergent things.
I see. So creating the structure for that type of thing to take hold.
Yeah, so for example, we spent some time working with the U.S. Army, and it's a huge organization. You can't possibly figure it out centrally, every activity that people are going to be involved in out in the field. So things like how do you create an environment where people in the field can build stuff themselves and make that not just possible but encouraged. Those kinds of things fit into this notion of intentional emergence.
Okay.
Inside of a big company, it might mean creating platforms that let people build their own solutions.
I see. So what's your overall sense of how enterprise is applying big data? Are they doing a good job? I know that's a loaded question, but
I don't know
what's your sense of it?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question of good or bad at this stage. I think what it is it's a sense of, it's a question of sort of what are the driving factors today? There is a growing sense in sort of CIO offices that data is an asset, not just a component of an application, and that combining those things together rather than leaving them as part of individual applications has a lot of meaning. But generally, I think a lot of the driving factors today, and many corporations are still sort of, we're moving to this sort of parallel world, but we're still priced on the monolithic world, whether it be database systems or computing systems, or, a lot of the legacy is still, how they're architect, how they're priced, everything still sort of remains in that era. So a lot of people are just saying, how can I use these parallel technologies, these parallel approaches to data to save money? And then ultimately you see rapid transition after that to doing much more sort of interactive things, agile things, sort of data analytical things.
Sure.
So yeah, it varies by industry, but certainly some people are doing a lot with this and understanding how it can transform their businesses, and others aren't. I mean, one of the things I would find really interesting is to sit down and look at sort of the key players in a lot of different industries and sort of just explore how might these things completely disrupt their business. And if they were thinking hard about it, how would they be thinking about it, separate from the technology?
Yeah. So last question for you. Sometime back you had a radar post where you were actually examining data's impact on productivity and growth.
Yeah.
And do you expect that big data will lead to exponential increases, or are we talking more about incremental and limited increases?
Yeah, I don't know the answer. I think it's going to vary by industry. I mean, what I was trying to explore with that post was the notion that, for many, many, many decades of the Industrial Revolution, significant year-over-year productivity growth in countries like the USA meant that every generation had a better chance than the previous generation. And the question is do these kinds of technologies create the same kind of draft? And I think in some areas, maybe healthcare, for example, very well could. You can imagine completely different approaches to healthcare that are much, much more productive coming out of this. In other areas, maybe it takes some of the cost out of brokering and finding the things we want to buy, but I don't see that as transformative in the same way. So it's hard to judge. And then the other question I think that's really interesting in this is will it enhance productivity in a way that still leaves that sort of mass center employed? Or are we creating a dumbbell economy out of this where you've got highly compensated people at one end and very low compensated people at the other because the technology's taken out all the jobs in the middle? I think all those things remain to be seen.
Interesting. Well, thanks so much for stopping by. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yep.